Throughout history, few names evoke as much fascination, mystery and allure as Cleopatra VII, the last active ruler of Egypt's Ptolemaic dynasty. For over 2,000 years, her legend has grown beyond the confines of ancient texts, becoming the subject of plays, poems, and films. She is remembered as a queen of unmatched beauty, a woman whose charm and intelligence captivated some of the most powerful men of her time. Yet when we peel back the layers of myth and propaganda, a deeper and more complex truth emerges. Cleopatra was not simply a beautiful woman. She was a shrewd politician, a skilled diplomat, a strategist, and above all, a survivor in a world dominated by men and empires. But how did Cleopatra earn this reputation as the most beautiful woman in history? Was her allure truly based on her physical appearance alone? Or was it a combination of intellect, charisma, and political genius that made her irresistible to those around her? To answer these questions, we must go back to the very beginning of her story, to the world she was born into, and to the circumstances that shaped her, into the figure who continues to mesmerize us today. Cleopatra entered the stage of history in 69 BCE, born into one of the most turbulent and dangerous royal households of the ancient world. Her family, the Ptolemies, had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries following the death of Alexander the Great. Though Macedonian, Greek by descent, the Ptolemies had taken on the role of pharaohs, blending Greek culture with Egyptian traditions in a delicate balancing act. But beneath the surface of this dynasty's grandeur was a kingdom plagued by infighting, betrayal, and constant threats from within and without. Cleopatra's childhood was steeped in political intrigue, where survival often meant outsmarting one's own siblings, parents, or Roman overlords. This was no ordinary upbringing. From the moment she could walk, Cleopatra was trained in the arts of persuasion, politics, and performance. Unlike many women of her era, she received an elite education. Scholars believe she spoke multiple languages, possibly as many as 9, including Greek, Egyptian, Hebrew, Aramaic, and even Latin. She studied philosophy, literature, astronomy, and medicine. In an age when most queens served symbolic roles, Cleopatra prepared herself to rule. Her intellect was just as much a part of her beauty as her appearance, and it would become her greatest weapon. Yet Cleopatra's world was not defined solely by books and tutors. She grew up in Alexandria, a city unlike any other in the ancient world. Founded by Alexander the Great, Alexandria was a bustling metropolis, a melting pot of cultures, and the site of the legendary Library of Alexandria and the towering lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Here, Cleopatra was exposed to the grandeur of empire and the fragility of power. She walked the marble halls of palaces filled with Greek statues and Egyptian symbols, surrounded by both luxury and constant danger. Alexandria was a city of spectacle, and Cleopatra learned early on the importance of image. But image alone would not be enough. By the time Cleopatra reached adulthood, Egypt was no longer the dominant power it once had been. Rome, rising across the Mediterranean, cast its shadow over the Ptolemaic throne. Cleopatra inherited a fragile kingdom, weakened by corruption and reliant on Roman support. In this precarious environment, she had to craft her own path to survival. And she did so by using every tool at her disposal: her education, her wit, her political cunning, and yes, her beauty. It is important to note, however, that ancient sources often exaggerated Cleopatra's physical appearance. Roman writers, especially her enemies, portrayed her either as a temptress who used her looks to ensnare men, or as a manipulative seductress who brought ruin to great leaders like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. But Greek and Egyptian accounts paint a different picture. Cleopatra's allure was not simply in her face or figure, but in her presence. She was known for her charisma, her voice, her intelligence, and her ability to make those around her feel important and valued. Beauty, in Cleopatra's case, was not just skin deep. It was the totality of her being. As we explore Cleopatra's life in this documentary, we will uncover how she became more than just a queen. We will see how she mastered the art of statecraft. In a world where women were rarely allowed to lead, we will see how she turned her relationships with Rome's most powerful men into opportunities to protect her kingdom. And we will see how, through legend and memory, she became immortalized as a figure who transcended her time. Each chapter of this story will peel back a layer of the myth and reveal the woman underneath. We will begin by understanding the grandeur and tension of Alexandria, the city that raised her. Then we will journey into Cleopatra's youth, where she learned the dangerous realities of family politics. We will examine her rise to power, her rivalry with her siblings, and her bold alliance with Julius Caesar that forever changed the fate of Egypt. We will follow her passionate and strategic relationship with Mark Antony, a love affair written in blood and ambition. And finally, we will confront her tragic end, an end that marked not only the fall of a queen, but the fall of Egypt as an independent power. Cleopatra's story is one of survival, ambition, and reinvention. She was a woman who lived in a world dominated by men, yet managed to bend history to her will. She was called beautiful, but her true beauty lay in her mind, her charm, and her courage. Her legacy challenges us to ask, what does it truly mean to be the most beautiful woman in history? In the chapters to come, we will uncover the truth behind the legend. We will see how Cleopatra's life was not just about beauty or romance, but about power, identity, and resilience. She was a queen who dared to fight for her people, a strategist who navigated the most dangerous empire of her time, and a woman who became a symbol that endures across centuries. This is not just the story of Cleopatra the seductress, nor Cleopatra the tragic lover. This is the story of Cleopatra the ruler, the thinker, the survivor, the story of how she became the most beautiful woman in all of history. To understand Cleopatra's rise and her legacy, we must first step into the world that shaped her, Alexandria. For Cleopatra, Alexandria was not just a city. It was a symbol of power, knowledge, and ambition. It was the heartbeat of Egypt and, in many ways, the center of the ancient world. Founded in 331 BCE by Alexander the Great, Alexandria quickly became one of the most dazzling metropolises of antiquity. Unlike the ancient cities of Athens or Rome, which were born from centuries of growth, Alexandria was a planned masterpiece. Its wide avenues, gleaming marble palaces, bustling harbors, and grand monuments reflected Alexander's vision of a city that would stand as the bridge between East and West. Though Alexander himself would not live to see its glory, his successors, the Ptolemies, ensured that Alexandria became the beating heart of their empire. When Cleopatra was born in 69 BCE, Alexandria had already stood for nearly 250 years as the crown jewel of the Mediterranean. At its height, it was home to 500,000 people, a stunning mixture of Egyptians, Greeks, Jews, Syrians, Nubians, and countless other peoples drawn from the farthest corners of the known world. Ships arrived daily at its harbors, carrying spices from Arabia, silks from the East, grain from the Nile, and goods destined for Rome. To walk its streets was to hear a dozen languages spoken, to see merchants haggling, philosophers debating, and scholars bent over scrolls. Perhaps Alexandria's most remarkable treasure was its library. The Great Library of Alexandria, though often shrouded in myth, stood as the largest repository of knowledge the ancient world had ever seen. It is said to have housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls, works collected from across the Mediterranean and beyond. Captains who docked in the city were required to surrender any books aboard their ships, so they could be copied for the library's collection. For Cleopatra, who would later be famed for her education and intellect, the influence of such a place cannot be overstated. She grew up in a city that worshipped knowledge, where ideas were considered as valuable as gold. and where rulers were expected not just to wield power but to embody wisdom. But Alexandria was more than just books and scholars. Its skyline was dominated by the lighthouse of Pharos, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Towering nearly 400 feet above the sea, it guided sailors safely into the city's harbors, its flame visible for miles. For Cleopatra, the lighthouse was more than a beacon for ships. It was a metaphor for what her dynasty represented: light in the darkness, civilization amidst chaos. To grow up under its shadow was to be constantly reminded of Egypt's grandeur, and of the responsibility that would one day fall upon her shoulders. Yet beneath its brilliance, Alexandria was a city of contrasts. For all its wealth, much of Egypt's population lived in poverty. The Ptolemies, Cleopatra's ancestors, ruled as foreigners, descendants of Greek conquerors rather than native Egyptians. Though they adopted many of Egypt's traditions, dressing as pharaohs, building temples, and participating in religious rituals, the dynasty remained outsiders in the eyes of many. Cleopatra, however, would be different. Unlike her predecessors, she embraced the Egyptian language and culture, winning the loyalty of her people in ways her forebears had never managed. This decision would become a cornerstone of her power. But in her youth, Alexandria's dual identity, Greek and Egyptian, was a daily reality. Politics in Alexandria was no less volatile than its culture. The Ptolemaic dynasty was notorious for its internal conflicts. Brothers fought sisters, parents fought children, and assassinations were not uncommon. The palace, though filled with opulence, was a dangerous place to grow up. For Cleopatra, survival meant learning the art of intrigue from an early age. She would have observed the shifting alliances of her family members, the sudden disappearances of rivals, and the constant interference of Rome in Egypt's affairs. Rome, the rising superpower, was already entwined in Alexandria's destiny, watching the city's every move and waiting for weakness. Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XIII, exemplified these struggles. Known as the flute player for his obsession with music, he was both charismatic and deeply unpopular. His reign was marked by political instability and heavy reliance on Rome to maintain his throne. To secure Roman support, he paid enormous bribes, draining Egypt's treasury and angering his people. Cleopatra, as his daughter, witnessed firsthand how delicate the balance of power was. Rome's presence loomed large in her childhood, teaching her a lesson she would never forget. Egypt's survival depended on its ability to navigate the ambitions of the Roman Republic. Yet Cleopatra's Alexandria was not only about politics and survival, it was also about spectacle. The Ptolemaic rulers understood the importance of image and public display. Festivals honoring the gods, processions showcasing wealth, and ceremonies blending Greek and Egyptian traditions filled the city's calendar. Cleopatra would later perfect this art of spectacle, using grand entrances, elaborate displays, and theatricality to captivate audiences, whether they were her subjects in Egypt or powerful Roman generals. We must also consider the environment in which Cleopatra was raised, a city at the crossroads of culture, philosophy, and science. The scholars of Alexandria studied mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. They debated the nature of the universe, dissected the human body, and charted the stars. To be raised here was to be immersed in a culture of inquiry and discovery. For Cleopatra, who later impressed even her Roman adversaries with her intellect, this environment was formative. She was not simply a queen of beauty, she was a queen of ideas. And yet Alexandria could also be a place of fear. For all its wonders, its streets were filled with tension. Riots were common, often sparked by hunger, political disputes, or anger at foreign rulers. The threat of assassination was ever present within the royal palace. In such a climate, Cleopatra learned vigilance, resilience, and the ability to adapt quickly to shifting circumstances. These skills would later prove invaluable. as she navigated the treacherous waters of Roman politics. By the time Cleopatra reached adolescence, Alexandria was both a shining jewel and a fragile kingdom. It represented Egypt's enduring wealth and culture, but it was also a city under constant pressure from within and without. To be a princess in this world was not to live in carefree luxury, but to prepare for the brutal realities of leadership. Cleopatra's beauty, which would later become legendary, was not forged in idle ease but in the crucible of survival, intellect, and ambition. Thus, Chapter 1 of Cleopatra's story reveals a crucial truth. Her beauty was inseparable from her environment. Alexandria itself was beautiful, dazzling, and powerful, but also precarious, dangerous, and complex. In many ways, Cleopatra embodied her city. She was cosmopolitan yet deeply Egyptian, cultured yet pragmatic, dazzling yet strategic. To understand the woman, we must understand the city that raised her. Alexandria was not merely the backdrop of her life. It was her foundation, her stage, and her mirror. As we move forward into the next chapter, we will explore Cleopatra's youth in greater depth, her family's rivalries, her unique education, and the formative years that prepared her to step into one of the most perilous thrones in history. Cleopatra's story truly begins not in the glittering halls of power, but in the precarious years of her youth. To be born into the Ptolemaic dynasty was both a privilege and a curse. It meant living in the lap of luxury, surrounded by marble palaces, golden ornaments, and the reverence of being linked to Alexander the Great's legacy. But it also meant being thrust into a world where betrayal was common, where kin turned against kin, and where survival required more than wealth. It demanded sharpness of mind, adaptability, and an understanding that trust could be a fatal weakness. Cleopatra was born in 69 BCE to Ptolemy XIII, often called the flute player for his devotion to music and revelry rather than to politics. Her mother's identity remains debated. Some historians believe she may have been Cleopatra V Tryphena, a member of the Ptolemaic dynasty, while others speculate she could have been of Egyptian descent. If the latter is true, Cleopatra may have carried native Egyptian blood, a distinction that would help explain her later ability to connect with her people more deeply than her forebears. Growing up in the royal palace, Cleopatra was exposed from a young age to the instability of her family's rule. The Ptolemaic dynasty had a long tradition of internal rivalries. Brothers married sisters to preserve the purity of their bloodline, and yet these very unions often devolved into bloody conflicts for control of the throne. Cleopatra's own childhood was marked by this atmosphere of suspicion and tension. Each sibling was both a companion and a potential rival. Every glance across the banquet table might conceal ambition, and every gesture of kindness could mask betrayal. Unlike many royal daughters of her era, Cleopatra was not destined to fade into the background. From an early age, she showed qualities that set her apart. Contemporary accounts and later historians note that Cleopatra possessed not only beauty, but also a remarkable intellect. Where her siblings were content with the privileges of palace life, Cleopatra pursued knowledge with an almost relentless curiosity. The Ptolemaic court placed enormous value on education, and Alexandria, with its legendary library, was the ideal place for a young mind to flourish. Cleopatra was tutored in languages, philosophy, rhetoric, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. She could converse with scholars on equal footing, a rarity for women of her time. While many rulers of her dynasty were content to rule as Greeks in Egypt, Cleopatra distinguished herself by learning the Egyptian language itself. This decision cannot be overstated in its importance. She was the first Ptolemaic ruler to embrace the tongue of her subjects, bridging the cultural divide that had long separated the Greek elite from the Egyptian masses. To the people of Egypt, this was not a small gesture, it was a statement of identity. Cleopatra was not merely a foreign ruler perched on their throne. She was a queen who sought to embody Egypt itself, Her linguistic talents were legendary. Plutarch, writing more than a century later, claimed Cleopatra could speak as many as 9 languages, allowing her to communicate directly with foreign envoys without interpreters. In the treacherous world of diplomacy, this was a powerful weapon. She could gauge the tone of her interlocutors, charm them with her words, and adapt to cultural nuances in ways her rivals could not. From her earliest years, Cleopatra was equipping herself not only with the appearance of royalty, but with the tools of power. But her education was not confined to books. Cleopatra learned early the delicate art of survival in a court riddled with intrigue. Her father, Ptolemy XIII, ruled precariously, relying heavily on Roman support to maintain his throne. His unpopularity among Egyptians, fueled by his reliance on Rome and his lavish spending, meant Cleopatra grew up in a kingdom on the brink of rebellion. She saw firsthand how her father's weaknesses undermined his reign and how the shadow of Rome loomed over Egypt's destiny. The lessons were stark. Egypt's wealth, derived from the fertile Nile and its lucrative grain exports, made it an object of envy. To Rome, controlling Egypt was not simply about prestige, it was about survival. Grain from the Nile fed the people of Rome. Without it, the Republic could face famine and unrest. Cleopatra, even as a child, must have realized that Egypt was too valuable to remain untouched by Rome's ambitions. The challenge, she would later understand, was not to resist Rome outright, but to navigate its power with cunning and strategy. Meanwhile, within the palace walls, Cleopatra had to contend with her siblings. She had one older sister, Berenice IV, and 2 younger siblings, Arsinoe IV and Ptolemy XIII, who would later become both her ally and her rival. These relationships were fraught with tension, as each child knew the throne was never secure. When her father was temporarily deposed and forced into exile, Berenice seized power, ruling as queen in his absence. The episode ended with brutal consequences. When Ptolemy XIII returned with Roman support to reclaim his throne, Berenice was executed. For Cleopatra, the lesson was again clear. Power was fragile, and the price of losing it was often death. In this crucible of danger and ambition, Cleopatra sharpened the qualities that would define her reign. She became observant, cautious, and strategic. She learned when to speak and when to remain silent, when to align herself with power, and when to retreat into the shadows. These were not the lessons of idle royalty. They were the lessons of survival. But we must not reduce Cleopatra's youth merely to politics and fear. She was also growing into a young woman of striking presence. Ancient sources, while often colored by Roman bias, agree that her beauty was not conventional in the sense of flawless features. Rather, it was her charisma, her presence, and her ability to command attention that set her apart. Cleopatra understood that beauty was not simply a matter of appearance. It was a performance, a combination of wit, charm, voice, and intelligence. She could captivate those around her not merely with her looks, but with her ability to make them feel seen, heard, and understood. Her training in rhetoric and philosophy gave her a mastery of persuasion. To listen to Cleopatra speak was to be drawn into her orbit. Later, even her most formidable Roman rivals, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, would fall under her spell, not because she was the most physically beautiful woman they had ever encountered, but because she combined intellect, allure, and confidence in a way that few could resist. As she grew older, Cleopatra must have sensed her destiny. She was not like her siblings, content to drift in the currents of palace intrigue. She was ambitious, calculating, and aware that she possessed gifts that could carry her beyond the palace walls. Yet ambition alone was not enough. For Cleopatra to ascend to the throne, she would have to survive the treacherous tides of her family's rivalries and the ever-looming threat of Roman interference. By the time she reached her teenage years, the stage was being set for a dramatic upheaval. Her father's reign continued to falter. Rome's influence grew stronger, and Egypt itself teetered on the brink of collapse. In this world of uncertainty, Cleopatra was preparing herself, not only to inherit a throne, but to fight for it. She had the education, the charisma, and the strategic mind, but she also had the will to endure what others could not. Thus, Cleopatra's youth was no idle chapter of her story. It was the foundation of everything that followed. She was shaped by the grandeur of Alexandria, the fragility of her dynasty, the dominance of Rome, and the dangerous rivalries of her own siblings. By the time she emerged into adulthood, she was not merely a princess of Egypt. She was a survivor, a strategist, and a woman ready to seize her moment when it came. As we move into the next chapter, we will witness that moment, the death of her father, the chaos of succession, and Cleopatra's first steps into power as the Queen of Egypt. A throne she would hold with both brilliance and defiance against the greatest empire the world had ever known. The year was 51 BCE. The Nile flowed as it always had, nourishing the fertile lands of Egypt. But the throne of the pharaohs was anything but secure. King Ptolemy XIII, Cleopatra's father, had died, leaving behind a kingdom in turmoil and a dynasty on the edge of collapse. For Cleopatra, now about 18 years old, this was the moment she had been preparing for all her life. Her father's will decreed that Cleopatra would rule jointly with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, who was only about 10 years old at the time. This arrangement was not unusual in the Ptolemaic dynasty. Siblings often ruled together, and sometimes even married, in order to preserve the legitimacy of their reign. But such arrangements were rarely harmonious. For Cleopatra, sharing power with a child king and, more importantly, with the regents and advisors who controlled him, would quickly become a bitter struggle for survival. From the moment Cleopatra ascended the throne, she demonstrated her independence. Unlike her predecessors, who often relied on the counsel of Greek courtiers and advisors, Cleopatra sought to embody Egyptian traditions more fully. She styled herself not only as a queen of Macedonian descent but also as a true pharaoh, adopting Egyptian dress, rituals, and religious symbolism. She presented herself as the living embodiment of the goddess Isis, a connection that resonated deeply with her subjects. This decision immediately set her apart from her forebears, who had always maintained a distant, almost foreign relationship with the Egyptian people. But even as Cleopatra sought to consolidate her power, the political landscape around her was shifting in dangerous ways. Her younger brother's advisors, particularly the influential eunuch Pothinus and the general Achilles, resented Cleopatra's assertiveness. To them, she was an obstacle to their own control of the throne. They viewed the young queen's determination to rule independently as a threat to their influence, and soon enough, they began to turn Ptolemy XIII against her. Cleopatra, recognizing the danger, moved decisively. She attempted to sideline her brother's regents and present herself as the sole ruler of Egypt. Coins minted during the early years of her reign depict Cleopatra alone, with her name and title unshared, an audacious move that made clear her intentions to reign without her brother, overshadowing her authority. But this boldness came at a cost. By 49 BCE, only 2 years into her reign, tensions between Cleopatra and her brother's faction erupted into open conflict. The struggle for the throne mirrored the instability of Egypt itself. Economic troubles weighed heavily on the kingdom. A devastating famine, brought on by a poor flooding of the Nile, left much of the population hungry and desperate. Meanwhile, Rome, the great superpower to the north, was locked in its own civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great. For Egypt, this internal Roman conflict presented both danger and opportunity. But it also underscored a harsh reality. Egypt's independence was increasingly fragile. Cleopatra initially attempted to secure her position by allying with Rome. She supplied Julius, Caesar and Pompey with grain during their campaigns and sought to present Egypt as an indispensable ally. But as the rivalry between Caesar and Pompey intensified, Cleopatra's internal struggles with her brother left her vulnerable. By 48 BCE, the conflict between Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII had reached its breaking point. Pothinus and Achillas orchestrated her removal from Alexandria, driving her into exile in Syria. It seemed as though Cleopatra's bold attempt to rule Egypt alone had failed. And now she was a queen without a throne. But Cleopatra was not one to accept defeat. In Syria, she began gathering support, raising an army with the goal of reclaiming her crown. This moment reveals the essence of Cleopatra's character: resourceful, determined, and unwilling to be sidelined. Unlike many displaced rulers who faded into obscurity, Cleopatra saw exile not as an end but as a strategic pause. Fate, however, would soon intervene in dramatic fashion. In the summer of 48 BCE, after suffering defeat at the Battle of Pharsalus, Pompey the Great fled to Egypt seeking refuge. For Ptolemy III and his advisors, this presented a dangerous dilemma. Offering protection to Pompey might antagonize Caesar, but turning him away could also be seen as defiance. They chose a brutal solution. Pompey was lured to the shore and murdered. His severed head presented to Caesar when he arrived in Alexandria shortly after. The plan backfired spectacularly. Instead of being grateful, Caesar was horrified by the treachery. To him, Pompey had been not only a rival, but also a Roman statesman of immense stature. The murder reflected poorly on Egypt and, more importantly, on Ptolemy XIII's court. Cleopatra saw in this moment a chance to regain her throne, and she seized it with characteristic daring. Legend has it that Cleopatra had herself smuggled into Caesar's presence rolled up inside a carpet, or, according to some accounts, inside a linen sack. However embellished the story may be, its symbolism is powerful. Cleopatra was not afraid of bold gestures. She understood the value of spectacle, of turning a political meeting into a theatrical display that would capture Caesar's imagination. And it worked. Caesar, now in Alexandria, became an ally of Cleopatra. He recognized her intelligence, her charm, and her determination, and he saw in her a partner who could stabilize Egypt under his influence. With Caesar's support, Cleopatra returned to Alexandria, and soon enough, the conflict with Ptolemy III escalated into open war. The so-called Alexandrian War saw Cleopatra's forces, supported by Roman legions, clash with those loyal to her brother. The fighting was fierce, and at one point Caesar himself found his position in Alexandria precarious, cut off and besieged by Egyptian forces. But in the end, Caesar's military brilliance prevailed. Ptolemy XIII, attempting to flee across the Nile, drowned in the river that had sustained his ancestors for centuries. The throne of Egypt now belonged to Cleopatra once again. She was reinstated as queen, though formally she ruled alongside another younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, who was little more than a figurehead. In truth, Cleopatra was now the undisputed ruler of Egypt, her position secured not only by her own determination, but also by her strategic alliance with Rome's most powerful man. This chapter of Cleopatra's life reveals much about her rise to greatness. She had faced exile, betrayal, and the overwhelming force of palace intrigue, and yet she had returned stronger than before. She had shown that she was not merely a pawn of her dynasty, but a queen capable of shaping her own destiny. By aligning herself with Caesar, she not only regained her throne, but also positioned herself at the center of the Roman world's most pivotal events. And so Cleopatra emerged from the shadows of exile into the full light of power. She had proven herself not just as a survivor, but as a ruler of extraordinary skill and daring. Yet her story was far from over. In the years to come, she would not only consolidate her power within Egypt, but also captivate the hearts and imaginations of Rome's most powerful men, forever intertwining her fate with the destiny of the ancient world. When Cleopatra secured her throne with Julius Caesar's aid, She was not merely restored to power. She was thrust into the orbit of one of the most powerful men the ancient world had ever seen. Their alliance has long fascinated historians and storytellers alike. Was it a romance born of passion, a calculated political maneuver, or a blend of both? The truth, as with much of Cleopatra's life, lies somewhere in the shimmering middle, a union of personal magnetism and shrewd strategy. Cleopatra was in her early 20s when she met Caesar, who was already in his 50s, a seasoned general and statesman. By this point, Caesar had conquered Gaul, marched on Rome, and declared himself dictator. He was at the height of his ambition, commanding not only armies but also the political destiny of the Republic. For Cleopatra, aligning herself with Caesar was not simply a matter of romance. It was survival. And more importantly, it was opportunity. The relationship between Cleopatra and Caesar began under extraordinary circumstances. Alexandria was a city in chaos, torn apart by civil war and still reeling from the fallout of Pompey's assassination. Cleopatra had already shown her audacity in the dramatic manner of her introduction to Caesar, whether truly unrolled from a carpet or presented in some equally theatrical fashion. She understood that making an unforgettable first impression was key. Caesar, who appreciated boldness, was reportedly captivated by her wit, intelligence, and presence. But Cleopatra was not content to be merely Caesar's lover. She sought to be his equal. She engaged with him in discussions of politics, philosophy, and governance. Ancient writers often depicted her not only as beautiful, but as a master of conversation, fluent in multiple languages, and able to charm through intellect, as much as through appearance. In Caesar, she saw a protector and partner. In Cleopatra, Caesar may have seen more than an exotic queen. He saw an ambitious monarch whose vision extended beyond the narrow politics of Egypt. Their partnership quickly turned into an alliance of global significance. Caesar, embroiled in his own struggles in Rome, needed Egypt's wealth and stability. Cleopatra, in turn, needed Caesar's military and political backing to secure her throne. Together, they began shaping Egypt's place within the wider Mediterranean world. During their time together in Alexandria, Cleopatra gave birth to a son, Ptolemy XV, better known as Caesarion, Little Caesar. To Cleopatra, this child was more than a personal joy. He was a symbol of legitimacy and continuity. With Caesarion, Cleopatra could claim that her dynasty was intertwined with the bloodline of Rome's most powerful man. This connection elevated her stature not only in Egypt, but also in the international stage of politics. Yet Cleopatra's relationship with Caesar was not without controversy. In Rome, Caesar already had a wife, Calpurnia. News of his Egyptian mistress, and especially the birth of their child, stirred gossip and outrage among Roman elites. For many, Cleopatra was seen as a dangerous foreign influence, a queen whose hold on Caesar threatened the traditions of the Republic. The idea that Rome's dictator might be seduced or worse, ruled by an exotic queen sparked resentment and fear. Nevertheless, Caesar did not shy away from his connection to Cleopatra. When he returned to Rome in 46 BCE after his victories, Cleopatra visited the city as his honored guest, residing in one of his estates along the Tiber River. Her presence caused a sensation. Romans marveled at her regal bearing, her jewels, her entourage of attendants. But behind the spectacle, the political implications were profound. Cleopatra's stay in Rome was a declaration that she was not merely a client monarch under Roman control, she was Caesar's equal partner. This was an era when the Republic was already teetering. Caesar's growing power, his reforms, and his disregard for senatorial authority made him both revered and despised. Cleopatra's role in his life added another layer of intrigue. Some Romans feared that Caesar might even seek to crown himself king, using Cleopatra and their son as symbols of a new dynastic order that would unite Rome and Egypt. The relationship between Cleopatra and Caesar was thus more than personal. It was emblematic of a broader clash between tradition and change. For Cleopatra, aligning herself with Caesar was a bold gamble, but one that solidified her power. For Caesar, Cleopatra was both a valuable ally and a living reminder of the grandeur and wealth of the East. Despite the whispers in Rome, Cleopatra returned to Egypt with her position stronger than ever. With Caesar's backing, she eliminated remaining threats to her authority. Her younger brother and co-ruler, Ptolemy XIV, remained on the throne only nominally, a boy king overshadowed entirely by Cleopatra's dominance. It was clear to all that Cleopatra ruled Egypt in her own right, with Caesar's influence ensuring no Roman rival could unseat her. But Caesar's destiny, like Cleopatra's, was one of brilliance cut short by tragedy. On the Ides of March 44 BCE, Caesar was assassinated by a group of senators who feared his power threatened the Republic. For Cleopatra, the news was devastating. Not only had she lost a lover and ally, but she had also lost the man who had guaranteed her throne against Rome's shifting tides of power. With Caesar dead, the Roman world plunged once again into civil war. In this new and uncertain landscape, Cleopatra's position was perilous. Her survival now depended on her ability to navigate yet another round of Roman rivalries. Some historians suggest that during these years, Cleopatra may have quietly had her younger brother Ptolemy XIV poisoned, removing him from the line of succession and leaving her Caesarion as her co-ruler. This was a bold move, but one consistent with Cleopatra's determination to protect her dynasty and her child's future. The death of Caesar marked the end of one chapter in Cleopatra's story, but it set the stage for another. Soon she would align herself with yet another Roman titan, Mark Antony. If her relationship with Caesar had been a careful blend of politics and power, her bond with Antony would burn with even greater intensity, shaping not only her fate, but also the fate of the Roman Republic itself. Cleopatra's time with Julius Caesar was brief in the grand sweep of history, but its significance cannot be overstated. Through this alliance, she restored her throne, secured her dynasty, and brought Egypt to the very center of Roman politics. She proved that she could captivate not just her subjects, but also the greatest general of her age. For Cleopatra, beauty was never mere ornament. It was a tool, wielded alongside intellect, charisma, and ambition. Her story with Caesar reveals the essence of Cleopatra's rise, a queen who refused to be a passive figure, who instead forged her destiny by engaging directly with the towering figures of her time. In Caesar, she found both a protector and a partner, and together, they reshaped the balance of power in the ancient world. But as history would show, Cleopatra's true test was yet to come. After the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE, Cleopatra's world was once again thrown into turmoil. The man who had restored her throne, legitimized her rule, and fathered her child was gone. Rome, the great power upon which Egypt's fate increasingly depended, was descending into chaos. Civil war consumed the Republic, with Caesar's allies and assassins vying for dominance. For Cleopatra, survival demanded that she find a new ally among Rome's emerging rulers. That ally would be Marcus Antonius, better known to history as Mark Antony. Mark Antony was one of Caesar's most trusted generals, a man of immense charisma, military brilliance, and personal indulgence. Alongside Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, Antony emerged as one of the most powerful figures in the aftermath of Caesar's death. The two men, along with Lepidus, formed the Second Triumvirate, a political alliance that divided the Roman world among them. Antony took control of the eastern provinces, which brought him into direct contact with Cleopatra's Egypt. Their first meeting, however, was more than a political transaction. It was a theatrical event that would shape history. Cleopatra understood, as she had with Caesar, that presentation mattered as much as substance. According to the historian Plutarch, Cleopatra sailed up the river, Cydnus, to meet Antony in a golden barge adorned with purple sails and silver oars. While attendants dressed as cupids fanned her, she herself was dressed as Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Music filled the air, incense perfumed the breeze, and Antony was enthralled before a single word had been exchanged. This was no mere vanity. Cleopatra knew that Antony was a man who lived as much for spectacle and pleasure as for power. Unlike the austere Octavian, Antony reveled in luxury, banquets, and indulgence. Cleopatra offered him not only wealth but also companionship that matched his temperament. She met him on his own terms, blending political necessity with personal allure. Their relationship quickly deepened into both passion and alliance. Antony was captivated by Cleopatra's wit, intelligence, and daring. She, in turn, saw in him the protector Egypt needed in a world where Rome's shadow loomed ever larger. Together they became inseparable, sharing not only nights of revelry but also visions of empire. Their union produced 3 children: Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus. With these children, Cleopatra sought to secure not only her dynasty, but also a vision of a revived Hellenistic empire, one that might stretch across the east with Alexandria as its capital. She and Antony even styled themselves as divine rulers, presenting themselves as Dionysus and Isis, gods of wine, fertility, and renewal. The story of Cleopatra VII is one of resilience, charisma, and ambition. For years she had maneuvered her way through the turbulent politics of the Mediterranean world, aligning herself with Julius Caesar, then with Mark Antony, all in the name of preserving Egypt's independence and her dynasty's survival. Yet by the final decade of her reign, the game had changed. Rome was no longer divided, but united under a rising power, Octavian, the man who would become Augustus, Rome's first emperor. Cleopatra's greatest gamble was her partnership with Antony. But as their fortunes waned, she found herself caught in a struggle she could not escape. Her fall was not sudden but gradual. After Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE, Rome plunged into civil war. Antony, Caesar's loyal general, formed the Second Triumvirate with Octavian and Lepidus, dividing Rome's territories among them. Cleopatra initially kept her distance, but in 41 BCE, she was summoned to meet Antony in Tarsus. Seizing the opportunity, Cleopatra arrived on her legendary barge, dressed as the goddess Aphrodite. Antony was captivated, and soon the two began their political and romantic alliance. For a time, this partnership flourished. Cleopatra bore Antony 3 children, and together they envisioned a powerful Eastern empire. In 34 BCE, Antony staged the donations of Alexandria, where he and Cleopatra distributed eastern territories to their children, presenting Cleopatra as Queen of Kings. This was no small act. It was a direct challenge to Rome's authority. Octavian seized on it, portraying Antony as a traitor under the spell of a foreign queen who sought to dominate Rome. Cleopatra's image as the dangerous seductress was weaponized in Octavian's propaganda, setting the stage for their final confrontation. The decisive moment came in 31 BCE at the Battle of Actium, a naval clash off the coast of Greece. Antony and Cleopatra assembled a massive fleet, but Octavian's admiral, Agrippa, proved the superior strategist. Cleopatra commanded her own ships, a rare feat for a queen. But when the tide of battle turned against them, she made the fateful decision to withdraw with her fleet. Antony, torn between duty and devotion, followed her, leaving his men leaderless. The retreat marked the beginning of the end. Actium was not the final battle, but it shattered their aura of invincibility. Following the defeat, Antony and Cleopatra retreated to Egypt. For a brief period, they attempted to rebuild their power, but Rome was relentless. Octavian advanced methodically, cutting off their allies and support. In Alexandria, Cleopatra did not despair. She fortified her capital, hoarded treasures, and considered escape routes. Some accounts suggest she even tested deadly poisons on prisoners to prepare for the possibility of choosing her own death over humiliation. By 30 BCE, Octavian had arrived at Alexandria's gates. Antony fought a final desperate battle, but his forces were outnumbered and demoralized. As defeat loomed, he received false news that Cleopatra was dead. Heartbroken, Antony fell on his own sword, though he did not die immediately. He was carried bleeding to Cleopatra's mausoleum, where she had barricaded herself. There, in their final embrace, Antony died in her arms. Cleopatra was now alone, her fate sealed. Octavian entered Alexandria in triumph. The young conqueror, only 33 years old, understood the symbolic value of Cleopatra. Bringing her alive to Rome would be the ultimate display of his victory, parading her as the foreign queen who had dared to defy the Republic. Cleopatra, however, refused to play this role. She had lived her life on her own terms, and she intended to die the same way. In August of 30 BCE, Cleopatra arranged her final act. She dressed in her royal robes and adorned herself with the symbols of Isis, the goddess she had so long embodied. With her attendants, she secured a venomous asp, or possibly another form of poison, and brought about her own death. Ancient sources differ on the method. Some say she let the snake bite her. Others suggest she used a poisoned ointment or hairpin. Whatever the truth, Cleopatra's end was deliberate and symbolic. She chose death as a queen, rather than humiliation as a prisoner. Her death marked the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty, and the last chapter of Hellenistic Egypt. With her gone, Egypt became a Roman province, its wealth absorbed into Octavian's empire. Octavian, now unchallenged, declared himself Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. Cleopatra's fall thus coincided with the birth of the Roman Empire, a historical turning point that reshaped the ancient world. Yet Cleopatra's legacy did not end with her death. Almost immediately, her story was molded into myth. To Octavian and his supporters, she was remembered as the foreign temptress who had brought down Antony. In their narrative, her death was not noble but tragic, the fitting end of a woman who had overreached. But among Egyptians, her memory endured as that of a ruler who had embodied the goddess Isis and defended her kingdom against overwhelming odds. The fascination with Cleopatra's final gamble lies in the duality of her story. On one hand, she failed, her empire lost, her dynasty extinguished, her body carried to the tomb beside Antony. On the other, she triumphed, not militarily but in legend. By choosing her own death, she denied Octavian his victory parade. By dying as a queen, she ensured that her story would never be one of defeat alone. What is striking is that Cleopatra's fall was not simply personal. It symbolized the larger clash between East and West, between a fading Hellenistic world and the rising power of Rome. Cleopatra stood as the last great monarch of the ancient Mediterranean, a woman who dared to rule in her own right, who faced the might of Rome, not as a passive bystander but as an active participant in history. Her end was tragic, but it was also monumental. For centuries, poets, playwrights, and historians have returned to that final scene, Cleopatra in her chamber, adorned as a goddess calmly accepting death. It is an image that captures the essence of her reign, theatrical, commanding and unforgettable. She may have lost her throne, but she secured immortality in legend. Thus, Cleopatra's final gamble was not merely a military campaign or a political alliance. It was the ultimate act of defiance, the decision to write the ending of her own story. By denying Rome the spectacle of her humiliation, she transformed her death into a statement of autonomy and power. She ensured that history would never see her simply as Octavian's captive, but as Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, unconquered in spirit, eternal in memory. Cleopatra VII's story did not end with her death in 30 BCE. In some ways, it had only just begun. Though she had fallen in her struggle against Rome, the image she left behind, queen, goddess, seductress, strategist, has outlived the empire that conquered her. For over 2 millennia, Cleopatra has remained a figure of fascination, a woman whose beauty, intellect, and ambition shaped not only her time but the imagination of every generation that followed. Her legacy is a tapestry woven from history and myth, fact and fantasy, power and allure. Cleopatra's fame as the most beautiful woman in history is one of her most enduring reputations. Yet the ancient sources present a more complex picture. Coins from her reign show a sharp profile with a strong nose and chin, features that might not align with later Western ideals of beauty. Plutarch, writing over a century after her death, remarked that her charm lay less in physical perfection and more in the way she carried herself, the power of her voice, the quickness of her wit, and the magnetism of her presence. What made Cleopatra truly beautiful was not her face alone, but the totality of her charisma. She was multilingual, able to speak Egyptian, Greek, and reportedly several other languages, a rare feat for a monarch of her time. She was well educated in philosophy, politics, mathematics, and medicine, able to converse with scholars and generals alike. To Caesar and Antony, she was not simply a lover, but a partner who could match their intellects. To her subjects, she embodied the goddess Isis, fusing divine presence with regal authority. Thus, Cleopatra's beauty was an idea, a fusion of intelligence, confidence, and presence that transcended physical traits. This is why, even centuries later, she could be remembered as the epitome of allure. Beyond beauty, Cleopatra's greatest legacy was her rule. For 21 years, she held Egypt together in a world dominated by Rome. This was no small achievement. The Ptolemaic dynasty had long been plagued by infighting, weak rulers, and foreign threats. Cleopatra not only stabilized her throne but turned Egypt into a significant player in the Mediterranean once more. Cleopatra's life was a testament to the power of presence, intelligence, and boldness. She lived in a man's world but carved out her own space within it. She played the game of empires, and though she ultimately lost, she lost on her own terms. Her death did not silence her story, it amplified it, ensuring that she would live on as a legend. Today, when we think of beauty, power, and charisma intertwined, we think of Cleopatra. She remains not just Egypt's last pharaoh, but history's eternal queen, the woman who defied Rome, captivated the world, and transformed her life into legend. Her story reminds us that beauty is not simply appearance, but influence, intelligence, and the ability to inspire. Cleopatra may have died more than 2,000 years ago, but in memory and myth she is immortal. Cleopatra's story ends not in silence, but in echoes that continue to reverberate across centuries. Her life was brief by our standards, just 39 years. But it was lived at a scale that very few could match. She was not merely a queen of Egypt. She was the last pharaoh, the last living link to an unbroken chain of rulers that stretched back 3,000 years to the days of the pyramids. Her death closed one of history's greatest chapters, and yet paradoxically it began a new one. For though Cleopatra the woman died in 30 BCE, Cleopatra the legend has never died. This is why her story is not just history, it is also myth. She was at once real and larger than life. The power of her narrative lies in the way it bridges the worlds of fact and imagination, truth and storytelling, and it is here in this delicate balance that we must consider her true legacy. And so, as our story draws to a close, we return to the question, how did Cleopatra become the most beautiful woman in all of history? It was not her face alone, though countless artists have tried to capture it. It was her spirit, her intelligence, her charisma, her fearlessness, and her determination to live and die as a queen. Beauty fades, but presence endures. And Cleopatra's presence has endured for over 2,000 years, shaping art, literature, and imagination. Her reign marked the end of pharaonic Egypt, but her legend has outlived empires. Rome itself has fallen, its glory faded. But Cleopatra's name is still spoken, her story still told. In the end, her beauty was not merely physical. It was the beauty of a life lived with audacity, of a queen who dared to resist the greatest power of her time, of a woman who transformed herself into a symbol that could never be erased. Cleopatra, last pharaoh of Egypt, queen, goddess, lover, and ruler, remains immortal. Her story reminds us that history is not only about battles won or lost, but about the human beings who, through vision and will, leave behind an echo so powerful that it can never be silenced. 2,000 years later, the echo of Cleopatra still calls to us, and perhaps it always will.